Hi everyone, I'm just waiting for Ryan and Conatin to join since they're the people with topics on the agenda.
Yeah, we can change it, however, to make you comfortable with it. Well, that's
Right, so hopefully Ryan and Conatin will join soon. In the meantime, I'll just address my topic, which is that in the recent call, there was a presentation about multi-cluster runtime, which is a multi-cluster extension to controller runtime. And the idea would be to onboard it. Jeremy sent an email to the mailing list to that effect. So if people have any comments, please respond there, or if you think it's fine, you can +1 as well, and that way we'll be able to get the process going properly. All right. Hi, Ryan. Hi, Carter. Ryan, feel free to go ahead with your topic.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm a bit
Whenever you're ready.
late. Give me a second. So yeah, it's kind of like a last minute thing. I finally get the. Let me see where's the. Yeah, I finally get the cap started. So I already see some comments. Yeah, so this is what we have been discussing for the last few meetings. I kind of just incorporated most of the comments, and some of them I said it's hard to address here. So one thing I didn't address here is how do we know the last time this property is refreshed? Because currently the property itself is just a key value pair. There are two ways to do that. One is to just use a JSON, make it less schema enforced, so that we say that in your JSON value, for example, here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, right? So for example, here, instead of just value, we say that every value needs to come with a timestamp inside that JSON. But that is as I said, it's kind of just a JSON format. Otherwise, we need to change the schema of the cluster property, cluster profile. Inside that property, we need, instead of key value pair, just a normal key value, we need to make it a structure with key value last observed time. And when we expand to that, we might encounter other needs in that structure. So that I will send it as a second PR. Personally, normally I prefer a more hard, like schema-wise approach, so that it is more enforceable. Just API-wise, you can get validated instead of a kind of loose JSON recommendation. So that's the second PR, because it's hard to make it combine these two together. So that's kind of the high level ideas. Yeah, and then the whole point of making this a PR is make it easier to comment and easier to resolve. We had a lot of comments. I incorporated most of the comments from the previous doc, and here we just try to make it more formal and official as part of CAP. And when this merged, we plan to implement those properties in our respective cloud provider, cluster managers. That's about it. I know it's last minute. I kind of just put it off last night, so I don't expect anybody have seen that yet. But just for that for the community to take a look. That's it. Any questions? If not,
Not really, yeah, not really a question, but I would prefer to have the timestamp in the schema instead of just as a JSON.
yeah, I think that probably is the more preferable way. So I will add a follow-up PR or a parallel PR that address that, and then they probably have a merge problem. Then I will need to merge these two. Depends on which one gets merged first. I think Laura had a question.
Yeah, I have a question / thought about the like process of like how to say introducing new well-known properties and just wanting to like consolidate between like this and the about API cap about like how to I guess like propose those and also how to like document them. So yeah, I see here there's kind of some notes about like a process of how to like put things in, and
Yeah.
I'll
Sounds
give this
clear.
like a closer look for sure. But yeah, I think this is something that was missing before.
Yeah, just one thing, just to clarify, for at least for
Yeah.
those who are not familiar with this this proposal, is those actually are about API properties, and we just copy those from the member cluster workload cluster to the cluster profile property. So they are actually aligned. That I don't know if this should also go to the about API, that there's
Right.
another cap, or it
Yeah.
should be here.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying, just in terms of at least like defining these as well-known properties, that they have a certain name, and that that name has or that like the value like follows some specific format or whatever. And whether that like historically, because we just had the about API cap, they were just there, and also that was like a point in time where everything that we cared about was in, you know, that cap, because that was like when we were working on MCS multi-cluster DNS. But I think as we expand the number of those well-known properties, then we need like a more like centralized and way to like have the list of what those are and how they like what their value schema is. So yeah.
Yeah, can see maybe, yeah, we also, yeah, I don't know how to do that. When we get to that list, we probably
Yeah.
need to update that cap too, or at least put it somewhere in the
Yeah,
outside
I
of
think
this.
yeah, I think if we could like, I think what we should probably do is take what's in the about API about the well-known properties, and instead like link that like somewhere else that's more central that both of these can, and then we have kind of like a separate list of like, these are the well-known properties, these are how they behave, this is like their usages, backlink to like whatever the thing. That seems to make more sense to me, whereas like the way it's written now was just like convenient at the time that it was one big cap.
Yeah. Yeah, that we can discuss or brainstorm a way to do
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, Mike.
Yeah, there are a few things I don't see addressed here. I don't know if you want to discuss them in the meeting, but I think, you know, one of the a couple of the issues that I remember that were raised before around this concept of type of node. One is I think that's currently written assuming that it's some kind of a SKU or type name from some cloud provider, but the property doesn't even indicate which the cloud provider is. And kind of more importantly, this is in a really difficult place because it's a standard for both producers and consumers, and that makes it really tough to make any changes, because how do you change the producers and the consumers at the same time, right? What happens? How do you are you expecting the consumers to know about all the clouds? I think that one of the challenges was maybe you want the nodes described in some more um, you know cloud independent way. I don't even know if there is such a thing. Another challenge related to this was about the count, right? There's a total count irrespective of type, and it was suggested that maybe we should have a count broken down by type.
Yeah, let me address these two. One is, yeah, so one thing I'm not too sure about, I think I changed name from SKU to type so that it's more general, and I didn't fully get the consumer and the producer side. So the cloud manager is the producer. So, and do you suggest that there were some suggestions to say that we'll say which cloud that type is coming from? But also because we want to support like on-prem, right? So I don't know for non-cloud type of node, what do we do? And with the cloud, what is consumer side? That's the part I didn't fully get.
Well, yes, part of my question is, right, if there's if there's no standard vocabulary, how does a consumer use these types? They don't have any particular meaning. I think that's ultimately the concern.
I see. So in my mind, of course, I mostly live in the cloud world, but even in on-prem, I assume the consumer knows the full list. So somewhere else they need to understand, for example, what does this G6 X large mean? Are you saying that the consumer, there's no way for them to actually, we need to provide a way for them to kind of know that too?
Well, I posed as a question, so I think you gave an answer, which is out of band. The consumers need to know out of band somehow around this. The consumers need to know what is the list of types and what each one means.
That's my assumption, because that's at least my assumption. And I don't know if it's not, I don't know how to provide that information, because that's more like a tied to each cloud provider. And on-prem, even on-prem, there are different types, and each type has meanings. Those meanings kind of, I don't know how we can get those.
I think out of
I'm
band
not
is a good
disagreeing.
assumption.
I'm not disagreeing with your answer. Okay, I'm saying write it down. Okay, put it in here.
Cool. And another question is about the type per type node. Yeah, that's something I like. I feel like this is very useful. If the community thinks that's useful, yeah, I definitely would put this in. I feel like that is actually more useful than either of these, right? You have it's a better of both worlds. You have each types count. That normally is more useful than total count and just types. I totally agree. If the community feels like this, you can add a sum up or something in the PR. I definitely would like to add that. It's just that format is not very easy to. Actually, it's not too difficult to decide either. At that time, I was just I was not sure if this is something the community will feel like it's useful. I personally feel like it's actually really useful. Yeah. So if there's some feedback say that's second opinion say that good, then yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I think it would be useful too. As I agree with you on the combination of count and type makes the most useful.
Yeah, at least from my experience. Cool. Thank you very much.
And then I'll raise one other thing about location. At least, in the worlds that I travel in, if you look within a cluster, it's recognized that the node location is a hierarchy. And we all know as we deal with clouds, cluster location is a hierarchy. So this scalar identification of cluster location seems like we should somehow recognize there's a hierarchy there.
Oh, interesting. So it will be, for example, again, the cloud will be like region and zone, right? Something like that.
Well, there's also things above region, right? Particularly when you get to stuff like, concerning about sovereignty and, regulations and so on, geography or something. But so yeah.
Can you give some example of that?
Sure.
Actually,
right. If you look in various clouds, right, you see concepts of geography or country or whatever, right? So it's not just region, as you say. It can be broken down finer into zone and at higher levels, right? I mean, if you want to look at for example, various data governance rules, they vary between the U.S., the EU, China, the Kingdom, and so on.
All right. So while I hear you, Mike, that normally doesn't surface itself in the spec for the nodes within a managed Kubernetes or even a VM, to be frank. I mean, sure, that thing could be decorated in other ways and then used by other systems that have these have this idea of like a geo. But I can tell you firsthand, like GKE doesn't really have an idea of a geo. I know AKS doesn't. Pretty sure EKS doesn't. Yeah.
Our case may be a little different, just being by nature of it, like bare metal and multi-ton. But yeah, I mean, we certainly do have all sorts of some groupings that we'd rather not have. But we have racks, maintenance zones, availability zones. We've got there are a number of different things as we span various other parts of our kind of like organizational setup, which at least at these kind of like low level kind of multi-cluster transport layers, having the ability to understand may be helpful. I don't know if all of those need to be down to the granularity of like a per node thing.
And just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that it goes down to the per node. We're talking about clusters.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So yeah, I think it depends really on whether you're treating Kubernetes as a system integrating with an existing front end to the complexities of kind of groupings and geographies and things, or if you're using Kubernetes to define those. And I think zone and region work well in clouds because things like racks and power strips are already handled at another layer of abstraction. And I think that might be why, for us at least, we end up exposing different things to clouds.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Corentin and I were actually talking about this yesterday on our implementation, how we might expose location, if you will, and it's different across cloud providers. So I mean, obviously, like our nomenclature is different than even Azure and Amazon's, but probably even more so different than someone an on-prem thing. So I totally understand. I just wonder, like in the examples of usually geo boundaries.
Tu restes par là, il va descendre comme tout à l'heure.
Corentin, you're talking to your kid. There you go, bud. So in the context of geo boundaries that are bigger than regions, it's usually around something related to compliance, right? And the way that I see most customers that are using GKE solve this is through putting labels and having like a metadata system on top of the Kubernetes object, not necessarily. And so I would imagine in like cluster profile, that would just be labels on the cluster profile object. I don't know that it needs to be a specific part of the spec though. I guess so that's my question is, do you think like once we get outside of location at the zonal, regional, or whatever that rack boundary is, do you think that there's a need to include a bigger location than a region?
I mean, I think that really depends on what features we then go on to build around the notion of zone and region, right? If in all the places where you can reference those zone and region things, you can also reference labels, then sure. But I don't think that's something we can mandate every like consumer of this API that then re-exposes something else do. So I'm also working on a topology cap in core Kubernetes where we're talking about like the topology.k.io zone labels and region labels. And there's been discussion about, supporting subdomains of topology.k.io for custom things. And I wonder if this almost touches on that and how we represent it. I don't know. Maybe what I'm saying is maybe all of this is best represented as some form of labels, and maybe we have some kind of a structured schema for those label keys and how we handle prefixes.
I think Laura's second.
Yeah. Maybe two things. One is Ryan, this is kind of a question for you, I think. Is the state of the review feedback you're looking for at this point about like this idea generally, or about if these specific cluster properties should be well known and rolled up, or maybe even a step further, what is the schema of these? Because I just don't know like what state exactly we're at for each of these individually.
Oh yeah, for that, I think for this cap is really for each individual, whether we decide this kind of the first batch of properties we want to support. So whether we can either accept or propose new ones or modify some of these. Yeah. And then the schema, the schema is the second one. As I said, we definitely missed what's the last time it's refresh time. Remember, the schema is a different PR.
Well, I mean the like schema expected in the value field for each of these well-known properties. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of this. Yeah.
Part of this conversation. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then I think also part of this conversation is the how do we onboard something as a cluster property? And right now, as a well-known cluster property, and right now we're going kind of like direct to, like, for example, looking at these lines 673 plus, it's talking about implementing them as an extension property first and then some like voting process or whatever. Obviously, the ones that exist from About API, we didn't do that, but we just did like a KEP process. And then I think these ones under discussion right now would also be basically like before, like wouldn't necessarily follow that process either. They're like being discussed as going directly into
sort of, we are doing the voting with this cap. We need enough
Okay.
people to say we like this in the cap, then it stays. If not enough people say we feel like this is useful, then we get that out of this, at least initially. And then could stay as an extension until enough people say, oh, this actually is useful.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have to leave in 2 minutes. I'm not sure I understand the big picture here. So this is not the About API. This is somehow a copy, and these things are going to be consumed as objects. I'm a little bit confused about this idea of using labels. I thought that ultimately we were going to be having some kind of a way of talking about representing properties of another cluster in some kind of a cluster inventory. Are we proposing that these individual objects all appear in that cluster inventory?
Yeah. So actually, this is About API, and this About API, this CR object exists on the individual clusters, and this is a corresponding property on the cluster profile API. Basically, you have a way to copy from you gather the information. So this is a source of truth, basically, because the source of truth is on the individual cluster. And this is a reflection of that source of truth. As cluster profile API is always a read-only one.
My point is that if you solve problems with labels in the cluster property in the About API, you have to have the labels appearing in this properties list. Just having name and value isn't enough.
Labels. Sorry.
I don't think I do think there was a comment earlier about labels, but as in terms of the About API there, I don't know exactly what that isn't part of the spec except beyond this.
I was referring to the suggestion earlier of dealing with the hierarchy of location by using labels on the cluster property. But if those labels don't appear in the properties list in the cluster profile API, you've kind of missed the something.
Yeah, no, we're not. This is more schematized one, not just labels. But going back to the location question, I understand the problem, but I don't know how to solve that. For example,
okay. Thank you. I have to leave. I'm sorry. Bye.
Sure. But just let me describe what's the problem I face is I do understand that user may want to know not only just its region, but also, for example, this one, they somehow need to magically figure out that it's actually from US, right? Although it's obvious for human, but it's not obvious for if you just look at this graph. And also for the on-prem cases, you may have a rack, right? If the cluster is on a rack, you have the rack, but then you have this, you want to know which data center this rack is on, or which port this rack is under. So how do you express this hierarchical one is something I don't know how to do that. Clay, yeah.
I think just kind of reiterating some of the thoughts here and trying to take how Hadoop does this with the Hadoop distributed file system. But does it make sense that we don't get into what is actually expressed in the hierarchy of the location, merely the separator between hierarchy elements? And then if any consumer has a preference or a thought on what those hierarchy elements are, it can mandate what somebody should provide. E.g., if somebody needs a rack, then it would say, hey, racks have to be described and whatnot. If somebody needs a country code, for example, you would have a consumer specify that, but all our specification would be, you know, this is the separator between location elements. I don't know if that might be a helpful way to achieve it.
What does separator mean? Can you give me an example?
So like the topology here, you've got, sorry, your screen's very small for me, but I think you've got cloud.google/US-east1. And so the slash there, right, might be that region separator, because you've got the cloud.google, right? I might be a multi-cloud user. So I might have cloud.google and cloud.aws and cloud.on-prem, you know, and then slash, you know, there's that separator. And so it seems like we can at least, I don't know that we can satisfy everyone, but we can at least express that the slash is our mandated hierarchy separator.
Oh, I see. So if I understand correctly, you're saying that you still use a single value, but say that you could have slashes as a hierarchy. That's solved the hierarchical thing, and we don't dictate exactly what are the exact granularity of each. It's kind of up to the producer and the consumer to agree on.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think that'll be explicitly out of scope. Is like, we don't want to try to encode anything like that in the actual API, because that could be subject to change at the clouds.
Yeah. Laura, you have a question?
Yeah, this is kind of another variation on this same topic, but another sort of pressure valve we could use for this issue of like per provider like schema being really different is, instead of mandating what this well-known property is, mandate that like a extension property for your cloud must exist that is named in some such way, and then like it has like whatever its internal like value representation is that like we don't even really care about, and it is instead up to the consumers to be able to like be able to what am I trying to say? Not apprehend. What's the word I want? Expect, I guess. be able to expect like what that name is, that it's like, you know, gke.location. Whatever or something. But then like it needs to have its own knowledge about like how to actually parse that value. So this is just another way that we could kind of like indirect in these types of cases where we can't come to a community consensus about like how that structure actually looks, that I think would still be valid. Yeah.
Right. I just the comment I'm putting is, does that kind of summarize what this community is driving towards? Like, we are not going to decide the format of this. This is, although it's a single value, but it could be interpreted different ways. Right. It depends on provider and the consumer, and they need to agree on how to interpret that. But we definitely cannot dictate the format. It's out of scope of this.
Yeah. I think the most that we can dictate is that vendor specific things are prefixed, like the prefix is required. So you can't just put US East 1 because that could be arbitrarily and might accidentally match things that are not the same.
It may be worth specking out or talking about a suffix for the prefix, or whether we do that, and that might be a nice alignment with some of the topology stuff in Kubernetes too, because there's an open question on that right now that we're punting on.
Can you elaborate on that, or link to the open discussion that you're referring to?
Exactly.
Yeah, sure.
I want to see the Kubernetes native ones. Yeah.
I mean, like, there's topology.k8.io/zone and topology.k8.io/region as per a certain Kepler standardized labels, but there's a discussion around whether we should support subdomains of that, whether it should be like x.topology.k8.io for extension, or if it should be like a organization dot, or if it should just be not and just like example.com/. But yeah, I'll drop a link in the notes.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't think that's something that we would probably have the appetite to like add on our own, but if that's a convention that does get through a CAP and is adopted by Kate's core, then I could see it being plausible to reflect that here.
Yeah, the current state of things is that those two, like zone and region, are the only standardized ones, and the
Yep.
remainder of the values in that like domain are effectively reserved. Integrators wanting to get like node topology information in a pod are going to be advised to right now the state of the art would be a mutating admission webhook on like pod binding. So at the time of scheduling to a node is the opportunity to copy the values, so that it's always like an atomic operation where you're setting those values and scheduling the thing. So that basically implies that it would be the example.com/ approach. But there was originally discussion on basically supporting arbitrary prefixes. That might still happen, but it would require kind of like a follow-up KEP to the original KEP that reserved zone and region, I think, and then kind of flow through. So
Interesting.
Thanks. I hadn't realized there was a KEP that actually reserved zone and region before.
Yep, this is standard already.
Interesting. So yeah, this is another thing we can think about whether we can adopt that too, but doesn't solve everything, right? So I don't know how to combine these two yet. Again, please comment either here or on the chat, or we can have Slack more Slack conversations there. Okay, I think that's it, and we can move to the next topic about the cross-cluster controller work with the cluster profile. Because I had a conflict last week, last meeting, so I didn't get to see the presentation of the cluster onboarding. The cluster, yeah, multi-cluster runtime. So from my understanding is it basically it allows the controller to actually it's already happening everywhere. It's just any multi-cloud control project has this controller that talks to multiple clusters, and this is just making it more formal and have provide layer of support. For this, we actually have our cluster profile. And our cluster profile API, Corentin and I were thinking about, and other children from Red Hat. I was talking to children too, and other kind of the maintainers of the cluster profile API group. We were also thinking about, because last year we were trying to add the credentials, but that credential one is kind of semi finished. It still didn't get to the point of that it's easily integratable with other consumers, right? The consumers, we kind of just punted this credential thing and leave it as implementation detail. But here we are thinking about we can make it actually really work by using the workload identity or OIDC federated identity, whatever you call it, so that we can actually make multi-cluster runtime. Instead of taking a Kube config, they can take a cluster profile. And when they take cluster profile, if we build the cluster profile API into the multi-cluster runtime, then the user experience would be, I grab a multiple, I have the cluster profile APIs objects, and then feed that into the multi-cluster runtime as a library, just like controller runtime library. And that experience seems to make it the cluster profile actually really useful instead of just the API. It becomes part of the library. User can actually really use it in this multi-cluster runtime. I don't know if I make it clear. We have some ideas. Corentin has some POCs. We actually did some POCs on AKS2 using a cluster profile as a Kube config, right? Instead of taking this is just some idea we are working on. We probably will have some working demos in a few months. I'm not going to things don't go that fast, but we probably could get something working in a few months. I don't have any. I don't have the document. I don't know if Corentin, you have anything you want to share.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you for the summary. I think that's totally right. Cluster profile is really only useful once we get the credentials, sadly. So I'm really hoping we can get to that story. I haven't had time as well to do it. I've got a bunch of stuff to prep for KubeCon and Google Next, so I'm a little bit behind on this, but I got a plan to make it a plugin. That's kind of an idea. Sorry, I'm out of breath. Just came up a hill. It's San Francisco, after all. Sorry. And so that's the idea. Some of the things I'm thinking right now is a plugin okay? I guess that's the big question so far, which is the alternative of what we've been discussing before, where it's all mandated kind of approach. But if we went for a plugin, that would be a little bit more flexible in how we support. So that would be the first question. Then once we kind of agree on that, it's kind of like on how is the plugin called? So I think the options are kind of around like Unix domain socket type of thing, kind of like CNI, CRI things, or do we want to go an exec kind of route? So that's one of the model, or central controller that you call. That's another alternative. Then there's the question of the inputs to the plugin, and things, for example, I'm thinking about are passing who you are as a controller. So kind of like, oh, I'm this pod, I'm this KSA, especially passing your KSA as your proof of identity. And then what identity you're requesting and for which cluster profile you're requesting it. And then the other side is the output you're getting. Are you getting a kube config that's kind of like vague? Or are you getting maybe a token and that you're just going to use that in an endpoint? So I think there's some questions in there that are interesting to solve. It's true that for Google, we are lucky to have workload identity. So it's kind of a solve story. And I'm trying to put down examples on like how I'm using cluster profile, like GKE enabled cluster profiles, if you will, is like it's cluster profile with GKE labels, and having a special library to use it, leveraging workload identity. I want to generalize that. That's my goal. And once we have that, our discussion with other frameworks will be so much easier, because then multi-queue, for example, they're on board, but they're like, oh, how do I get a credentials? And they're like, okay. And same thing for multi-cluster runtime. That's going to be super cool once we get that. So 100%, we need to move. If people have opinions on the stuff I mentioned, I'll totally take it. Please send me a note on Slack on the channel. I'll try to get to it in April ideally, or end of March, April, something like that. If someone beats me to it, please, I would really be happy to see this moving.
Yeah, we probably can give a kind of demo optimistically in the next SIG meeting, but everybody know it's a KubeCon time, so there are a lot of preparation, things like that. In the worst case, we can talk. I assume we'll meet some of you guys in KubeCon, and we can hash out more ideas there. But we do have a POC almost working, but I think it's just the proof of concept, right? So we would like to get more alignment on the format, the API schema, things like that. But we will see if we have a demo ready. Maybe we can do it. Just show up proof of concepts next meeting. Yeah, that's it for me.
That would be great to see a POC. So I don't see any hands raised. And with that, we've covered the agenda.
Stefan, one question I have for you is for the management cluster kind of opinion piece. I think at this point, I would need you or Jeremy's approval if we want to merge it. So
yeah, the position statement.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I need to review that again.
So I'll let you sing with Jeremy however you want to do it, if you're okay, or if you want to send back for more comments. I'm happy to follow up next SIG if next meeting if we need to.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Well, try to get to that this later this week so that we've got time to see what gets done about it before the next call.
Thank you.
All right. Well, have a good rest of the day, everyone. And I'll see you around.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Take care, y'all.